Welcome back to the channel where we uncover stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty and betrayal. If you're new here, buckle up. What you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Go ahead and hit that like button because this story deserves to be shared. Kang Minyi sat alone in his private surveillance room at 2:47 a.m., staring at footage that would destroy everything he believed about his own home. On the screen in front of him, his American chef, a woman he'd publicly accused of theft just hours earlier, was carefully wrapping bread in kitchen cloth. Her hands moved with precision, deliberate and quiet. But she wasn't heading toward any exit. Instead, Ava Morgan turned toward the East Wing, the isolated corridor where Kang's elderly mother lived in what everyone called comfortable retirement. Most employers would have seen confirmation of guilt right there, theft in progress. Another scheming outsider caught red-handed. Kang had installed these cameras specifically to catch her, to prove what his head housekeeper had been reporting for weeks: expensive ingredients vanishing, kitchen supplies disappearing, an American cook who couldn't be trusted. He'd been ready to have her removed from the estate that very morning, permanently. But something about the footage made him hesitate. Ava's expression wasn't guilty. There was no fear in her movements, no glancing over her shoulder like someone worried about being caught. Her face held something else entirely as she approached his mother's door, something that looked almost like grief. What Kang Minyi witnessed in the next 11 minutes would reveal a conspiracy so twisted, so calculated, that it had been happening right under his nose for months. The woman he'd labeled a thief was actually the only person in his entire organization who'd shown his mother a shred of human decency. And the person he trusted most, well, that's where this gets really dark. Because in a house built on secrets and power, sometimes the greatest betrayal comes from the people who have earned your absolute faith. The ones who know exactly where you're blind, exactly which lies you'll believe, and exactly how to exploit the trust you've given them. Kang had built an empire on reading people, on seeing through deception, on trusting no one. Yet somehow, he'd missed what was happening to his own mother. Until that night, until he saw Ava kneel beside his mother's bed and whisper words that would haunt him forever. "I brought you something to eat, Madam CEO. You must be so hungry." The response that came from his mother's lips, weak, trembling, desperate, made Kang's blood run cold. Before we dive into what happened next, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. This story has layers you won't see coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for every revelation. Because what started as a simple theft investigation was about to expose systematic abuse, calculated manipulation, and a scheme so cruel that even a man who'd built his fortune on violence found it almost impossible to believe. To understand how things got this twisted, you need to know who Ava Morgan was before she ever set foot in Kang Minyi's world. 28 years old, culinary school graduate from Atlanta, she'd come to Seoul chasing the kind of opportunity most chefs only dream about: a private position in one of the city's most exclusive households. The pay was exceptional, the kitchen was state-of-the-art, and the job posting had been oddly specific: American chef wanted for traditional family estate. What the listing didn't mention was that the family in question controlled half the underground operations in Seoul. Ava found out on her second day when she noticed the armed guards weren't just for show. By then, she'd already signed a contract that made leaving complicated. Besides, she told herself she was just the cook. Keep your head down, prepare the meals, stay out of family business. For the first 3 months, that strategy worked perfectly. Kang Minyi barely acknowledged her existence. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone running the Black Lotus Syndicate: cold, calculating, impossible to read. Most mornings, he'd eat breakfast in silence while reviewing reports. Ava would serve his food and disappear. Simple, professional, safe. The estate itself was massive, a fortress disguised as luxury. 37 rooms spread across grounds that required a full security team just to patrol. Staff members moved through the halls like ghosts, everyone aware that curiosity could be fatal. Nobody asked questions, nobody lingered where they didn't belong. Ava learned the rules fast: serve the meals, maintain the kitchen, never enter the East Wing. That last rule seemed strange, but not suspicious. Every household has private spaces. She assumed the East Wing was Kang's personal quarters, maybe where he conducted business he didn't want staff witnessing. Made sense for someone in his position. Then one evening, about 4 months into her employment, Ava stayed late finishing prep work for the next day. The kitchen was finally quiet after feeding 12 people for dinner. She was putting away ingredients when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. Footsteps in the corridor above, slow, unsteady, like someone struggling to walk. Then a voice, elderly, female, speaking in Korean, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was begging. Ava froze, straining to hear more. The voice came again, weaker this time, followed by a sharp response from another woman, younger, authoritative. That voice she recognized immediately, Madame Choi Sunai, the head housekeeper who'd been with the family for over 15 years. Whatever was being said, it didn't sound like a normal conversation. It sounded like a confrontation, one where only one person had any power. Ava told herself it wasn't her business. She'd survived this long by staying invisible, by not noticing things she wasn't supposed to see. Getting involved in household drama, especially in a place like this, was the fastest way to end up disappeared. But that voice, something about the desperation in it made her hands shake as she tried to focus on her work. 3 nights later, she heard it again, and this time she heard something else too. "Please, I'm so hungry, just something small." The response from Madame Choi was cold enough to hear through 2 floors. "You'll eat when you remember where you put the documents." That's when Ava realized something horrifying was happening in the East Wing. Something nobody else was going to stop. Ava spent the next 2 days trying to convince herself she'd misheard. Maybe the old woman was on a medical diet. Maybe Madame Choi was following doctor's orders. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why someone in this house was begging for food. Except she couldn't shake what she'd heard, that desperation, that hunger. On the 3rd night, Ava made a decision that would either save a life or end her own. After the evening meal service, she waited until the kitchen staff left. Then she carefully wrapped a small piece of bread, nothing fancy, nothing that would be missed from inventory, and hid it in her apron pocket. Her heart hammered as she climbed the back staircase toward the East Wing, every step feeling like a betrayal of her survival instincts. The corridor was dimly lit. Security cameras covered the main hallways, but this section seemed oddly neglected. Dust gathered in corners that the regular cleaning staff apparently never touched. Strange, considering how meticulously maintained the rest of the estate was. Ava found the door at the end of the hall. No guards, no locks, just a simple wooden door that opened with barely a sound. Inside, the room was sparse to the point of cruelty. A single bed, 1 chair, curtains drawn against windows that overlooked the garden. And in that bed, a woman who looked like she was disappearing. Madame Seo Unhwa was 73 years old, though she looked closer to 90. Her frame had the hollowed-out appearance of prolonged starvation. Skin stretched over bones, eyes sunken but alert. When she saw Ava standing in the doorway, fear flashed across her face. "Please don't tell her I asked," Madame Seo whispered in broken English. "I won't ask again." Ava's throat tightened. "I brought you food." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. What happened next would become Ava's routine for the following 6 weeks. Every night after the kitchen closed, she'd smuggle small portions, bread, rice, soup, whatever she could hide without triggering inventory alerts. Nothing extravagant, just enough to keep Madame Seo alive. During those visits, Ava learned the truth. Madame Seo wasn't senile, despite what everyone in the household believed. She was sharp, aware, and terrifyingly lucid about what was being done to her. Madame Choi had been systematically isolating her for months, telling Kang that his mother's dementia was worsening, that she needed specialized care, that only the head housekeeper could provide. In reality, Madame Choi was starving her, withholding food until Madame Seo agreed to sign documents transferring her personal assets, properties, accounts, investments accumulated over decades, into accounts Madame Choi controlled. "My son doesn't know," Madame Seo told Ava one night, her voice barely audible. "She tells him I'm confused, that I don't recognize him anymore. When he visits, she gives me medicine that makes me foggy, I can't think clearly, can't tell him what's happening." Ava's hands clenched. "Why doesn't he see you're starving?" "She feeds me before his visits, just enough that I don't look skeletal, then takes it away after he leaves." Madame Seo's laugh was bitter. "My own son thinks I'm losing my mind. He trusts her completely." That's when Ava understood the full scope of the trap. Madame Choi had spent 15 years building absolute trust, positioning herself as the one person who truly cared for the family matriarch. Nobody questioned her authority over Madame Seo's care. And anyone who might have noticed, well, in a household where asking questions could get you killed, silence was survival. Ava was risking everything for someone she barely knew. But walking away meant leaving Madame Seo to die. By week 7, Ava had developed a system. She knew which floorboards creaked, which hallways the night guards patrolled, and exactly how long she had between security rotations. 18 minutes. That's all the time she could safely spend with Madame Seo before risking exposure. But systems only work until someone notices the pattern. Madame Choi noticed everything. It started with small comments. "Ava, we seem to be going through bread faster than usual." Casual, almost friendly, but her eyes were calculating, measuring Ava's reaction. "I'll check the inventory logs," Ava replied, keeping her voice steady. 2 days later, Madame Choi appeared in the kitchen during evening prep. Unusual, since she typically delegated food-related matters to the staff coordinator. She walked the perimeter slowly, opening cabinets, checking storage containers. "Such a large kitchen for one chef," she observed. "Easy for things to go missing." Ava focused on chopping vegetables. "Everything's accounted for in my daily reports." "Of course," Madame Choi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it is." That night, Ava found Madame Seo in worse condition than ever. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. When Ava brought water and rice porridge, the old woman could barely lift her head. "She knows," Madame Seo whispered. "She's been restricting my water now too, punishment for something, I don't know what." Ava's jaw tightened. "I'll bring more tomorrow." "No," Madame Seo gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "She's watching you, I can tell. If she catches you," the old woman's eyes filled with fear. "My son won't question her word. He'll believe whatever she says. You'll disappear, and I'll die anyway." "I'm not stopping." "You should," Madame Seo's voice cracked. "I'm not worth your life." But Ava kept coming, each night more dangerous than the last. What she didn't know was that Madame Choi had already gone to Kang Min-yi with concerns about his American chef. Nothing too aggressive, just subtle suggestions. "I've noticed some irregularities in the kitchen supplies. The new cook seems to work very late hours. I'm certain it's nothing, but in a household like ours." Kang had initially dismissed it. Staff theft was common enough, usually small-scale. As long as it didn't affect operations, he didn't care. Then Madame Choi showed him doctored inventory reports, numbers that didn't add up, expensive ingredients unaccounted for, a pattern of missing items that coincided perfectly with Ava's shift schedules. "I hate to suggest this," Madame Choi said carefully, "but perhaps she's selling to outside contacts. Someone in her position, working for a family like yours. The information alone would be valuable." That changed everything. Information leaks could destroy organizations. If Ava was compromised, if she was feeding intelligence to rivals or law enforcement, the entire operation was at risk. Kang authorized the surveillance installation immediately. Cameras in the kitchen, the hallways, the storage areas. He wanted to see exactly what his chef was doing during those late-night hours. Madame Choi had smiled when he told her, I'm sure we'll find it's nothing serious. But she'd already begun planning Ava's removal. Once the cameras caught her stealing, once Kang saw the evidence with his own eyes, the American would be gone, permanently, and Madame CEO would have no one left to feed her. The trap was set. All it needed was for Ava to make one more trip to the East Wing, which she did that very night. At 2:47 a.m., Kang Minyi sat down to review the footage, expecting to confirm a simple case of employee theft. Instead, he was about to discover that the real thief had been sitting at his dinner table for 15 years. The footage started innocuously enough. Ava in the kitchen after hours, wrapping bread in cloth just as Madame Choi had reported. Kang leaned forward, ready to confirm his suspicions. Then she turned toward the East Wing. His mother's corridor. Kang's finger hovered over the pause button. Why would a thief go there? That wing held nothing of value except. He watched Ava approach his mother's door, no hesitation. She'd clearly done this before. The door opened, and the camera angle shifted to the interior feed he'd installed months ago when his mother's dementia had worsened. What he saw made his blood stop. His mother looked skeletal, gaunt, nothing like the woman he'd visited just 3 days earlier when she'd seemed frail but stable. How had she deteriorated so quickly? Then Ava knelt beside the bed, and Kang heard his mother's voice, clear, coherent, desperate. "You came, I thought maybe tonight you wouldn't." "I'll always come," Ava whispered, unwrapping the bread. "Can you sit up?" His mother struggled upward, hands shaking as she reached for the food, not the confused grabbing of someone with dementia, deliberate, starving. Kang's hands clenched on the desk. He watched his mother eat like someone who hadn't seen food in days, tears streaming down her face. Watched Ava produce a small container of soup from her apron, help his mother drink it slowly. The tenderness in that gesture, from a woman he'd been ready to have killed, made something crack inside his chest. Has she suspected anything? His mother asked between sips. "Madame Choi knows something's wrong. She's been watching me." "Then you have to stop, please, if my son finds out." "Finds out what?" Ava's voice was gentle. "That someone's been starving you, that the woman he trusts has been drugging you during his visits, so you seem incoherent." Kang's world tilted. "He won't believe it," his mother said. "Sunai has been with us for 15 years. She's shown him documents I supposedly signed, confused letters I don't remember writing. He thinks I'm losing my mind." The camera captured Ava's expression, pure rage barely contained. "Those documents she's forcing you to sign, what are they?" "Everything I own, properties in Busan, investment accounts, the land my husband left me." His mother's voice broke. "She's been starving me for weeks, saying I'll eat when I remember where I put the deeds, but I know exactly where they are, I just won't give them to her." Kang stood so abruptly, his chair crashed backward. 15 years. He'd trusted Madame Choi with everything. She'd raised him after his father died, managed the household, cared for his mother. He'd given her authority over the entire domestic staff, never questioning her decisions. And she'd used that trust to systematically torture his mother. He scrolled back through archived footage, hands shaking, found the recordings from his last visit to his mother's room, watched Madame Choi enter 30 minutes beforehand with a tray of food and a small medicine cup. Watched his mother eat ravenously, then take the pills. Watched her eyes go unfocused, her speech slur, her movements become confused. Then he appeared in the doorway, and his mother, drugged, disoriented, barely recognized him. He remembered feeling heartbroken that day, watching her deteriorate. Madame Choi had touched his shoulder sympathetically. "The dementia is progressing. I'll take care of her." He'd believed her completely. Kang pulled up financial records next. Corporate accounts he'd given Madame Choi access to for household management. The numbers looked normal at first glance, but when he dug deeper, he found it. Subtle transfers, money moving into accounts he didn't recognize, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic audits. She'd been stealing from him for years. But the money was nothing compared to what she'd done to his mother. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. What happens next is justice delivered in the only language people like Madam Choi understand. Kang Minyi sat in that surveillance room until dawn, watching weeks of archived footage. Every visit Madam Choi made to his mother's room, every dose of medication that turned a coherent woman into a confused shell, every meal withheld, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty. By 6 a.m., he'd compiled everything he needed. At 7:15 a.m., he made a phone call that would change everything. Assemble the household staff in the main hall, everyone, no exceptions. His second-in-command hesitated. "Sir, is there a security issue?" "You could say that." 30 minutes later, the entire staff stood assembled: cooks, guards, housekeepers, drivers, 23 people who kept the estate running. Most looked confused. A few looked nervous. Madam Choi stood near the front, perfectly composed in her customary black dress, hands folded. She'd been with the family so long that she carried herself with almost maternal authority. When Kang entered, she gave him a subtle nod of respect. He didn't return it. 3 months ago, Kang began, his voice cold enough to freeze blood, "I installed surveillance equipment throughout this estate. Some of you knew about it, most didn't." Madam Choi's expression never changed, but he saw her fingers tighten slightly. "Last night, I reviewed footage that revealed something I never thought possible in my own home." He gestured to the large monitor being wheeled into the hall. "Betrayal of the worst kind." The screen flickered to life, showed Ava entering his mother's room with bread, showed his mother's skeletal frame, her desperation, her tears. Gasps rippled through the assembled staff. Madam Choi's face remained perfectly neutral. "Sir, if I may explain." "You'll speak when I tell you to speak." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Kang played the next clip, his mother's voice, clear and coherent, explaining the starvation, the forced documents, the systematic abuse, then footage of Madam Choi administering the drugs before his visits, transforming his mother into someone he didn't recognize. Several staff members had gone pale. Others stared at Madam Choi with dawning horror. "For 15 years, Kang continued, I trusted you with everything, my home, my business, my mother's care." His voice was scalpel sharp. "You repaid that trust by torturing the woman who raised me." Madam Choi finally moved, straightened her spine. "Your mother is senile, confused. That girl has been manipulating her, feeding her lies. The girl has been keeping her alive." Kang's words cut like broken glass. "While you starved her, drugged her, stole from her, all to force her to sign over assets you had no right to. I have documents. Forged, all of them." He pulled out a folder, let it drop to the floor at her feet. "I had them analyzed this morning. The signatures don't match. The dates have been altered. Did you really think I wouldn't check?" For the first time, Madam Choi's mask cracked, just slightly. Kang stepped closer, and everyone in that room understood they were witnessing something dangerous. "You made one critical mistake. You assumed I wouldn't look, that I trusted you too much to question anything. I've served this family. You've bled this family." His voice was a razor. "The household accounts you managed. I found the transfers. The properties you convinced my mother to reorganize. They're in your daughter's name. You've been positioning yourself to take everything." Madam Choi's composure shattered. "You don't understand what I've sacrificed." "I understand that you tortured my mother." Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Kang turned to his security chief. "Remove her from the estate. Everything she owns stays here. She leaves with nothing." "You can't." "I can do whatever I want. This is my house." He leaned in close enough that only she could hear his next words. "And you should be grateful I'm letting you leave alive." Guards stepped forward immediately. Madam Choi tried to pull away, but 15 years of authority meant nothing now. They escorted her toward the exit, her protests echoing through the hall until the heavy doors cut them off. Kang watched her go, then turned back to the remaining staff. His eyes found Ava, who'd been standing near the back, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "The rest of you need to understand something." His voice carried absolute command. "What happened here happened because people saw things and said nothing, because silence felt safer than speaking up." Several staff members wouldn't meet his eyes. "My mother was dying 20 meters from where I slept, starving in a house with 5 kitchens, and not one of you told me. The shame in that room was suffocating." "Except her," Kang gestured toward Ava, "a woman who'd worked here less than 6 months, who had every reason to mind her own business and stay safe. She's the only one who gave a damn whether my mother lived or died." Ava looked terrified, like she couldn't tell if she was about to be thanked or executed. Kang crossed the room toward her, and she visibly fought the urge to step back. When he stopped in front of her, the height difference made her have to look up to meet his eyes. Then he did something that made every person in that hall freeze. He bowed deep, the kind of bow that shows profound respect. "You saved my mother's life," he said quietly. "While I was blind, while I failed her, you risked everything to keep her alive." Ava's eyes widened. I couldn't let her starve." "Most people could, most people did." He straightened, and his expression carried something that might have been shame. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," her voice shook. "I did what anyone would." "No," Kang cut her off. "You did what almost no one would. In a house like this, compassion is rarer than diamonds." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "My mother needs someone she can trust, someone who actually cares whether she lives. I'd like that person to be you." Ava blinked. "You want me to take over her care, completely, choose your own staff, report to no one but me?" His jaw tightened. "I can't undo the months I let this happen, but I can make sure it never happens again." "I'm not qualified." "You're the only person who's qualified." Kang's voice softened slightly. "She trusts you. That's worth more than any credential." Around them, the remaining staff were processing what they'd just witnessed. Their employer, a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure, had just bowed to the cook. The hierarchy they'd understood had shattered completely. Ava took a shaky breath. "What if I mess up? What if? Then we figure it out together." Something that might have been a smile touched Kang's expression. "You've already proven you can do the impossible. Everything else is just details." 2 hours later, Ava stood in Madame Sio's room as a medical team worked to stabilize her. The old woman was on IV fluids, being monitored constantly, finally receiving the care she'd needed for months. When Madame Sio's eyes opened and found Ava's face, she smiled, weak but genuine. "My son knows now," she whispered. "He knows everything." Ava squeezed her hand gently, "and he's furious with himself." "Good." Madame Sio's smile widened slightly. "He should be." Through the doorway, Kang stood watching. His mother was alive because of a chef who decided that doing the right thing mattered more than staying safe. In his world, that kind of courage was revolutionary. 3 weeks later, the estate looked different, felt different. Madame Sio's room had been completely renovated, windows that actually opened, comfortable furniture, flowers on every surface. Medical equipment monitored her vitals, but the prison-like atmosphere was gone. She was gaining weight slowly, her color returning, her strength rebuilding one day at a time. Ava had hired a small team she trusted, a nurse, a physical therapist, a cook who specialized in nutrition for recovery patients. Every person vetted carefully, every decision made with Madame Sio's well-being as the only priority. Kang watched the transformation from a distance, still processing his own failure. He'd built an empire on reading people, on seeing threats before they materialized, on trusting no one without reason. Yet the biggest threat had been the person he'd trusted most, and the only ally had been the one he'd almost destroyed. One evening, he found Ava in the garden with his mother. They were sitting together on a bench, Madame Sio wrapped in blankets despite the mild weather, laughing at something Ava had said. The sound of his mother's laughter, genuine, unforced, was something he hadn't heard in over a year. When they noticed him approaching, Ava started to stand, but he waved her back down. "Don't let me interrupt." Madame Seo smiled at her son. "We were discussing Ava's complete lack of knowledge about Korean dramas. It's embarrassing." "I'm learning," Ava protested. "I watched 2 episodes last night." 2 episodes out of 16 seasons. Madame Seo shook her head in mock disappointment, but her eyes were bright, alive. Kang sat on the bench across from them, and for a moment they were just 3 people enjoying the evening air. Not a crime lord, his tortured mother, and the chef who'd saved her. Just people. "I got word today," Kang said quietly. "Madame Choi tried to access one of the accounts she'd set up. Thought enough time had passed that I wouldn't be monitoring." Madame Seo's expression hardened. "What happened?" "She's been dealt with." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. Some things his mother didn't need to know. Ava shifted uncomfortably, reminded suddenly of exactly what world she was living in. But Madame Seo just nodded, accepting it. "Good," the old woman said simply. Then she turned to Ava with a gentler expression. "I'm tired. Will you help me inside?" "Of course." Kang watched them go, Ava supporting his mother's weight carefully as they walked toward the house. He'd given Ava a choice last week: stay in this world or take a generous severance and disappear somewhere safe. She'd chosen to stay. Not for the money, not for the prestige of working for someone powerful. She'd stayed for his mother. In Kang's experience, that kind of loyalty couldn't be bought. It couldn't be forced. It could only be given freely, and it was rarer than anything he'd ever found in his world of contracts and leverage. His phone buzzed. Business, always business. But he let it ring, watching Ava and his mother disappear into the house, their laughter drifting back across the garden. Some things, he was learning, mattered more than empire. Some debts could never be repaid. And sometimes, the people you think you're rescuing are actually the ones saving you. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. In a world built on power and fear, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply care. Ava didn't have weapons or influence or connections. She just refused to let an old woman starve. That's revolutionary. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a solid. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Ava's position. Would you have taken that risk? And hey, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this deserve to be told. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. 6 months after that night in the surveillance room, the estate had become something nobody expected: a home. Madame Seo had recovered enough to walk the gardens unassisted, though Ava still hovered nearby like a protective shadow. The medical team reported that her cognitive function was perfect, exactly as Ava had insisted all along. There had never been dementia, just drugs and starvation and a woman fighting to survive. The staff had changed too. Kang had replaced nearly everyone who'd remained silent during his mother's ordeal. The new team understood one non-negotiable rule: if something seems wrong, you speak up. Silence was no longer acceptable. Loyalty meant protecting the family, not protecting your own comfort. But the biggest change was in Kang himself. He'd started visiting his mother daily, not the obligatory 10-minute checks he'd done before, but real visits. Hours spent listening to her stories, learning about the woman she'd been before his world had consumed everything. Ava often joined them, and gradually, the 3 of them formed something that looked almost like family. One afternoon, Kang found Ava in the kitchen, her original domain, preparing his mother's favorite soup. She still cooked sometimes, said it helped her think. "She's asking about your childhood again," Ava said, without looking up from her work. "Wants to show me photos from when you were 8. "God help you," Kang leaned against the counter. "I had terrible haircuts." "She mentioned that," Ava smiled. "Also said you were scared of thunderstorms until you were 12. "She's making that up. She has photographic evidence of you hiding under her bed." Kang groaned, but there was no real embarrassment in it. Just the easy comfort of someone who'd stopped performing invincibility every second of every day. "Can I ask you something?" Ava set down her knife, finally meeting his eyes. "Why did you really let me stay? You could have paid me off, sent me somewhere safe, made sure I never talked about what happened here. Would you have taken the money?" "No." That's why Kang's expression was unreadable. People in my world, they're loyal until they're not. Until someone offers them more money, more power, more whatever they think they want. But you, he paused, you risked your life for someone who couldn't offer you anything. That's not loyalty, that's character. Ava looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of his words. "I just did what felt right." "Most people don't," he said it quietly, like a confession. "I built everything on the assumption that everyone has a price, that trust is just another transaction. You proved me wrong." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I'm still figuring that out." Through the window, they could see Madame Sio in the garden, reading under her favorite tree. Strong, alive, free from the nightmare that had almost killed her. "She talks about you constantly," Ava said. "Tells everyone you're the reason she survived, because you taught her to never give up." Kang's jaw tightened. "I nearly let her die." "But you didn't," Ava's voice was firm. "When you saw the truth, you acted, immediately, no hesitation. That's what she remembers." He wanted to argue, to list all the ways he'd failed, all the signs he'd missed. But Madame Sio appeared in the doorway before he could speak, her face lighting up when she saw them both. "There you are, I've been looking everywhere." She held up an old photo album. "Ava needs to see the birthday party incident of 1997. "Mother, no." "Oh yes," Madame Sio's smile was wicked, "the one with the cake and the fountain." As his mother dragged Ava toward the living room, both of them laughing, Kang felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of controlled territory or enforced order. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing the people in your house actually care whether you live or die. A year after the surveillance footage changed everything, Ava stood in the kitchen preparing dinner for 12. But this time, the guests weren't syndicate members or business associates conducting dangerous deals over expensive wine. They were Madame Sio's friends, women her age who'd been kept away during the dementia period, now welcomed back with open arms. Their laughter echoed through halls that had once felt like a mausoleum. Kang observed from his office, paperwork forgotten. His business hadn't collapsed after he'd shifted his priorities. If anything, his reputation had grown, not as someone ruthless enough to destroy enemies, but as someone loyal enough to protect family. In his world, that distinction mattered. His phone rang, a familiar number. "The property transfers are complete," his lawyer said. "Everything Madame Choi attempted to steal has been returned to your mother's name. We also recovered most of the funds from the offshore accounts." "And Choi herself?" "She's no longer concerned." The lawyer's tone suggested the conversation was over. Kang ended the call without another word. Justice in his world looked different than it did in courtrooms, but it was final. He found Ava later that evening, watching Madame Sio teach her friends a card game in the sunroom. His mother was gesturing animatedly, her cheeks flushed with color, her laughter genuine. She looked like someone who'd returned from the dead. "Because she had." "I never thanked you properly," Kang said quietly, standing beside Ava. "You've thanked me approximately 47 times. "Not enough." He kept his eyes on his mother. "She's everything to me. I didn't realize how much until I almost lost her." Ava was quiet for a moment. "You know what she told me last week?" She said the worst part wasn't the hunger or the fear. It was thinking you'd stopped loving her, that you saw her as broken. Kang's chest tightened. "But now she knows the truth. You never stopped. You were just deceived by someone you trusted." Ava finally looked at him. "That's not the same as not caring." "Does she really believe that?" "She tells anyone who'll listen that her son is a good man who made a mistake." Ava smiled slightly. "She's pretty proud of you." Through the window, Madame CEO caught sight of them watching. She waved, her whole face lighting up, then returned to her game. I used to think strength meant never showing weakness, Kang said, never admitting fault, never letting anyone see you care too much about anything. And now I think maybe strength is caring anyway, even when it makes you vulnerable. Ava nodded slowly. That's what your mother taught me. Every night when I brought her food, she'd thank me, but she'd also tell me to be careful, to protect myself first. Even starving, she worried about me more than herself. That sounds like her. They stood there together, watching the woman who'd survived hell with nothing but stubborn hope and the kindness of a stranger who refused to look away. You changed everything, Kang said finally. This house, my relationship with my mother, the way I see the people around me. You didn't just save her life, you saved. He struggled for the right words. Your family, Ava finished softly, I know. In the sunroom, Madame CEO won her card game and celebrated with a whoop of victory that made everyone laugh. She was 74 years old, had survived systematic torture, and refused to let any of it dim her spirit. Some people break under that kind of cruelty. Others become unbreakable. So let me leave you with this final thought. In a world that often rewards selfishness and punishes compassion, be the person who brings bread anyway. Be Ava, be the one who sees suffering and refuses to justify walking past it. Because sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest revolutions. If this story moved you, I need you to do 3 things. First, smash that like button. It helps more people find stories that matter. Second, drop a comment telling me about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness. I read every single one. And third, subscribe if you haven't already, because we're just getting started with stories that'll make you feel something real. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for caring about Ava, about Madame CEO, about what happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, be brave, be kind, and never underestimate the power of simply giving a damn.